How was your climate week? In a sense, every week is climate week since our climatological conditions continue to intensify while the response of our large-scale governmental and economic powers in addressing them continues to be weak. Perhaps you recently marched in the streets. How did you feel that went? Did you feel that it adequately instantiated the transformative change that is urgently needed? Is the federal government going to systematically overhaul our energy systems just because enough of us have been out there busting a move? Honest question. Or do you think that it's not enough? And if it's not enough, then what else is needed and what can we actually do? I've been increasingly preoccupied by these questions and the distinction between different kinds of action, what one might call direct versus indirect action. Direct action can be defined as the people's use of their own physical and economic power to cause immediately effective change. Indirect action, on the other hand, would be the complement of this, action that somehow educates or cultivates information about or moves the political dial toward such change. Now, certainly there is a lot of overlap between these categories, but I would say that if I examine my own actions, they tend toward the indirect and ideological, and that's something that feels in some ways incomplete. Here's some examples of the distinction that I mean. Doing an Instagram post about how you went to the climate march and had a good time and felt really inspired by all of the energy there. Good, excellent, and indirect. Physically and non-violently besieging the Federal Reserve and possibly getting arrested for demanding that the major banks divest from predominantly propelling the extraction of fossil fuels as they do. Direct. Making extremely labor-intensive and artistically wrought videos about climate change and about climate activism. Nice. Indirect. Actively physically creating new food and waste systems in one's immediate local environment by working in or building community gardens, compost sites, and other such physical material systems. Direct. Watching this video and learning something. Good. And indirect. Learning something about blowing up a pipeline, and then actually doing it in order to directly disrupt the physical systems and economic processes that perpetuate the greenhouse effect. Illegal and direct. I'm not saying you should do it, I'm just saying it would be direct. It's very important to note that both kinds of actions are important and valid. There may be actions that you strategically disagree with. There may be others that you dismiss as being ineffectual and suspiciously performative, but the overwhelmingly likely fact is that all of these actions are part of the sprawling cornucopia of what we actually need. And one of the most important things may be that you actually need to participate in both modes. And when I say you, I mean me, both to create balance in the movement overall and to create balance in yourself. Nathan? Because I myself have often felt this imbalance. I've poured countless hours into making videos like this one, usually more elaborate ones than this one, half in allegiance to the cause and half confessedly in narcissistic fascination at the timbre of my recorded voice and the greasy luxuriance of my unwashed hair. And I've so exhausted myself in that sincere and yet indirect ideological action that I end up depressed and self-obsessed and passively seeking solace in vegetative fixation on the very same screen on which these videos were posted and not even going outside. But there have been other times when I have done other forms of work, working in community gardens, turning the compost with my often underutilized video-making arms, being an actual body in the fullness of my humanity, both physically and psychically speaking, and in doing so, I have felt well. I am still at the beginning of creating this balance, but it feels important to continue to explore and to share that exploration because, as should go without saying, but is easy to forget in this age of information, it's not just about information and identity, it's about action and process, because an ism implies an identity and a belief, whereas an action is an actual thing, not just a movement, but a physical motion. A deed. I don't say this to create a sense of obligation or to make you feel like you aren't doing enough. I don't know what you're doing or not doing, and whatever you're doing is in some way fundamentally enough just by existing. Nothing makes a human being less inclined to do something than the aggressively enforced knowledge that they have to do it. At least that's how I feel. I say this rather as a reminder to myself. It feels better when I both think and do. And the more this simultaneity occurs, the more integration there is, the more I experience joy. I experience the joyful convergence of my work and my play. direct ecological action. It may paradoxically be the case that the only way we can actually ensure that we secure a better future is to not even make it about the future, but to make it about the present, to add to our protestations and critiques a larger measure of immediate physical transformation of our actual spaces, our actual neighborhoods, our actual lives within the limits of our considerable powers in the here and now. There are examples of this. One of the first and most important installations of wind energy was the result of a direct action in New York City in the 1970s. A group that became known as the 11th Street Energy Task Force independently installed a wind turbine on a building in the East Village to directly power the building independent of the energy grid. And they did this in defiance of Con Edison, the energy company, which tried to resist the project with bureaucratic red tape. But they did it anyway. And the installation worked, and they powered the building, which led to a legal battle, which in turn led to federal legislation protecting independent renewable energy producers and making it mandatory for utilities companies to purchase and distribute that independently generated renewable power. And now, even the Empire State Building and buildings nearby are powered by wind. Sometimes, the powers that be will only consent to the alteration of existing power structures once people have directly enacted the alternative structures they wish to see in the world, even when this requires direct and nonviolent defiance of existing regulations. Sometimes, if you build it, the man will come around. I witnessed this myself in the case of the community composting situation in New York City. When the city shut down its municipal composting program during the pandemic, independent community composting organizations rose to the occasion and kept up the process of turning the city's organic waste into soil and fuel. The independent increase in compost momentum provided the social and infrastructural preconditions for the city to bring its program back. In this case, there are some who would argue that the community organizations are even better stewards of the process, which brings up equally interesting questions about the comparative efficacy of centralized versus decentralized forms of authority in environmental systems. But the main point is this: do the thing that you want to have happen. Do that thing, and the powers that be will sometimes respond. We, after all, are the powers that be, even if that power is distributed so unequally that it starts to feel like very few of us have any power at all. We do have power. We can make stuff. We can make physical things with an equal amount of time and energy, the actual physical things and stuff that make up and provide for our actual physical lives. The sense of injustice that impels us to feel that it's not our responsibility to fix the problems that corporations have caused is a morally valid feeling. It's true, but that moral conviction does not imply that it's actually strategic or even spiritually beneficial or practically effective to exempt ourselves from the direct and active reconstruction of this world. These respective forms of action, direct and indirect, must be more abundantly intertwined. And again, I'm just saying it to remind myself and to start to create that balance for myself. And now I have to do it because I said it online.